talk on sexuality?
Well, first up, I think it seems pretty strange because you don't usually hear about sexuality from the pulpit or anything else like that. And but when I think about it, it makes a lot of sense because sexuality tends to get brushed under the carpet a lot in the church, and it's great to see it being brought out in the open.
How would you respond, Brad?
Well, I think it's not really any old priest. It's Chuck Gallagher, and Chuck's a really great prophet in the church, and he's a really great lover of the church, and I think that's all bound up with sexuality, and he's a really great prophet of his sexuality as a priest, and I think that's an important thing he has to share with us.
You're talking about his sexuality. What about your sexuality in respect to your faith? Do you think it's important to your faith?
Yeah, I'd say it's really one of the most important parts of being Catholic. Really, is how I relate to other Catholics. And that's my sexuality.
How would you feel about that question, Mary?
Well, I see sexuality as being everything that I am, my whole person, and it's like that saying, God doesn't think of us as just blobs, you know. We're sexual beings, and I think it's fantastic.
We'd just like to welcome you all here to celebrate with us Palm Sunday. Some people have come a long, long way today to be here with us from Windsor, Richmond and Penrith. And it's been a long, hot drive, so thanks very much for those people for joining us here today. Yes, it is. 1 month ago, the Maroubra Bay Antioch community outreached to the Anglican parish of St James in the city, and the team was sent along and they had a fantastic weekend, and they've now formed their own Anglican community which will be known throughout Australia as Emmaus. Yeah.
So could Emmaus stand up? They're here today and we'll give them a big welcome. I think we're very privileged to have with us today a Father Chuck Gallagher, who's
There's a big treat in store for us tonight with Chuck giving us a talk, and I think we're all very, very privileged to have such a great man of the church here with us tonight. Chuck Gallagher, for me, is a very special guy. He's a man who challenges me a lot and loves me a hell of a lot. And he makes me feel that I have a real importance in the church. I don't really think that there's anybody else who makes me feel so much alive or so much a part of the body of Christ as Chuck does.
And for me, I just don't know anyone who makes me more aware of the gift of my sexuality and just how important and great that is to the church. And so I'd just really like us all to give a great welcome to Chuck Gallagher in his talk, Sexy, Saint or Sinners.
How you doing this afternoon, lovers? That's what we're all supposed to be, isn't it? Before we start, could we kind of take advantage of the atmosphere that's here? And that is you. Could we just, what I'd like to ask you to do is just kind of breathe in the goodness that is in this room. I mean, it really is. I mean, there are great men and women here. Just breathe each other in. Okay, my brothers and sisters, I guess we could start off by saying, what does the title mean? Sexy, saint, or sinner? I guess most of us could kind of accept that sexy and sinner could go together, but we're sort of surprised when saint is thrown in there. Saints are supposed to be bloodless and prudes, and because we look on God's way as sort of dull, serious, good, but no fun. And we're so afraid of not having any fun. And that's not something that stops when you turn 18. It continues all our life long. I think the biggest objection to really taking the church seriously at any stage in our life is we're afraid we're not going to have any fun. And yet it seems like the world's way is so exciting. A perfect example, I think, is marriage. We think dating is exciting, and then people get married, and it's dull. Unfortunately, it's because we look at our mothers and fathers. And you guys have a job to do on that. You know, how much responsibility do you take for the sexual excitement of your parents? I mean, the simple truth is this, is for your parents, if they're not sexy, they're sinners. Because that's what marriage is supposed to be about. But you know, when we get so worried about God's way, just ask yourself, who created sex? It wasn't the world that created sex, it was God. And God didn't create it to get it suppressed. Any talent that Almighty God gives us, whatever that talent is, whether it's strength or energy or power or intelligence, He wants to have developed to the fullest possible degree. Remember the parable of the talents? Where one man was given 10 talents and another man was given 5 and another man was given 1. And the one who had 10 got 10 more. And the Lord praised him and said, good, and you'll get more. And the guy who had got 5 got 5 more. And again the Lord said, nice job. And the one who got 1 was afraid of it. And so he held on to it so he wouldn't lose it. And the Lord said to him, you messed it up. Now the same thing is true with our sexuality. It's not supposed to be something that's kept under tight control. It's supposed to be something that's developed. We all know that our brain should be developed. Well, so should our sexuality. And we think that it's just normal and natural that we grow into our sexuality. No, we grow into our bodies, but our sexuality is our full persons. A saint has to be sexual, because otherwise that saint is not human. What does the church say about this? What does the church say about sexuality? I think most people, if they're asked that question, would answer, the church says no. I don't think the church says no. I think the church says, wow. I really do. Because that's so wonderful about us. It's so close to our very identity. And the reason that the church takes sex so seriously and asks us to be very aware of how we're using our sexuality is because the church stands in awe of manhood and womanhood. A real tender awe. You know, when a baby is born, as it grows, one of the things that it does is it feels itself down to find out what's me and what's crib. You know, what's me and what's rattle. You know, and then the baby finds that by making certain faces or certain noises, it can control others, like mothers. Now, when we go through the teenage years, we also psychologically pat ourselves down to find out what is me as man or what is me as woman. And it's just as much of a self-pilgrimage and a journey in discovery as a baby does physically. And it's awfully important that we find our manhood, that we find our womanhood, because we can't be ourselves without it. The gospel calls us all to conversion. The gospel says, change your way of life. It says that to everybody on the face of this earth. Now, I think in God's plan for the normal person, the first and maybe the most serious conversion experience they ever have and it's a deep religious conversion experience, is falling in love. Because up until that time, we're very self-centered. And that's precisely what the gospel is calling us to get out of. But once we fall in love, we become other-centered. The person who was very much into themselves suddenly starts to think about the person that he or she loves. And they become very generous. More generous than they've ever been in their life. You know, I always know when a boy is ready to break up with a girl. As soon as he starts complaining about how much she's costing him, he's going to break up. While, you know, when he's in love, he's proud of how he's able to handle this. You know, she's an expensive date. What does Scripture say about the use of our sexuality? It's kind of strong. In Ephesians 5, St. Paul says, as for lewd conduct or lust of any sort, let them not even be mentioned among you. Your holiness forbids this. Say, what holiness? Remember, we are the body of Christ. Let no one deceive you with worthless arguments. How many times do we have bull sessions in the pub about sex? And an awful lot of it really is full of suds. You know, I think what an awful lot of people here this afternoon want from me is they want me to put down rules, which they'll immediately proceed to ignore. But they want me to say, now you can do this, and you can go this far, and you can't do that, but this is okay, and so on. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, we're talking about human beings here. We're talking about love. You can't have slide rules and measuring rods. What we have to be talking about is values. Now, one thing, honest to God, that I really, really, really want to avoid with all my heart is I don't want to put anybody on a guilt trip. Some of you may have made mistakes. Well, the first thing to remember is that this is not the greatest sin that you or I could commit. I'm not saying it's not wrong. I'm just saying that there's a lot of other sins that are much worse. I can remember, you know, going to confession after going out on dates. And the only thing that I examined my conscience about was, you know, did I touch her? But I never examined my conscience about things like ignoring her the whole night, you know, or taking another girl home. You know, now that's much worse than being handy-andy. Now, don't sit out there and say, as long as you go home with a girl, you can be handy-andy. But mean-spiritedness is a much worse sin, isn't it? So it's not the greatest sin. But, you know, so what you have to do is, if you have made a mistake, okay, get a fresh start tonight and you know, clear the decks and start over again. The Lord is always merciful. And an awful lot of times this business of the guilt trip can be just a self-pity thing. Or also can be excuse for, well, I blew it so I can continue the way I am. Another thing is, please don't fall into this trap. God loves me as I am. I got news for you. God does love you totally and completely, just as he loves me. But sometimes he hates the way I am because it stinks. You know, we hear this, so we just heard the story a couple of Sundays ago at Mass about the woman taken in adultery. And didn't all our hearts go kind of pitter-patter? And isn't that so Jesus-like? And oh, isn't he sweet? You know, he says, oh, will nobody condemn you? Well, then neither will I. You know. This is the wimp school of theology. And what we all forget is that Jesus turned to that woman and said, "Hey, babe, knock it off." So yes, Jesus does love me, but sometimes he tells me, "Cool it, man, cool it." The church sees the specialness of sexuality. After all, Jesus is sexual. He was a man, a real, honest-to-God man. Remember him with the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman. She was, kind of flirty. And so he let her do what she did best. He flirted with her. Remember, he went up and he asked her for a drink of water. And she said, "So you're asking me, a woman, for a drink of water? Oh." And he said, "Yes, I am." And that's how he got her attention. And Jesus was always that way. And that's why women were so responsive to Jesus. And Jesus loves his body, us, who are sexual. And he loves us sexually. Now, when by sexually, we're not talking about genital activity here. We're talking about manhood and womanhood, femininity and masculinity, the whole complex of my personhood, which is masculine or feminine. Nobody can really love me except loving me as a man. They can't love me as a person. Why as a person? Yeah. So all love is sexual. We can compare this with the Eucharist. The Eucharist is the most intimate experience in the church. And that's why anybody who receives the Eucharist in the Catholic Church must be totally committed to the Catholic way of life. It isn't just good enough that they believe this is the body of Christ. So anybody who engages in sexual experience has to be totally committed to a way of life with that woman or that man. Another way of putting it is simply to say the level of intimacy should be matched by the level of commitment. The church affirms sexuality. As a matter of fact, they've made sexuality a sacrament called matrimony. And it's a sexual sacrament. It's not a sacrament with sex. The core, the identity of that sacrament is the sexual experience and love of the couple. It's not just that, well, you got a man and a woman and sometimes they make love. Their very identity as a sacrament is their sexual delight in one another. And their whole spirituality has got to be sexual. That's why, it just gets me so often in church how non-sexual our married couples are. But what I've been doing is standing outside a church on Sunday, and when the couple comes up the walk to go to Mass, I say to them, on a scale of 1 to 10, how sexually desirous are you of each other right now? It might be a good thing to ask your parents when you sit down to supper. Well, they're always asking you where you are. Fair exchange is no robbery, right? But so I asked them, on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you with sexual desire right now for each other? And if they tell me less than 8, I say, why don't you go home? You're not ready for Mass. Because they're supposed to go to Mass as a couple. They're not supposed to go to Mass as a separate, man and woman who also have a relationship on the side. Wouldn't it be wonderful if the Catholic Church in Australia became known as a sexy church? We'd have converts galore. Now, all of you young folks are being raised in a home, and I'll tell you this. Whoever of you lives in a highly sexually charged atmosphere between your mother and father are the luckiest guys and gals in this room. Because the best way to be loved is through the sexual desire of your mom and dad for one another. When their love is directed toward you, they get very picky. When their love is toward one another and then flows over on you, they just melt. Because they say, oh, he looks so much like his father. On the other hand, if there isn't that sexual love, they say, he's just like his father. And I had to put up with it from him, but I ain't going to put up from any snot-nosed kid. So you have a real stake in improving the sexual climate of your home. If you think your mom and dad are on your back, stop telling them to get off your back and start telling them to hug one another. I really mean that. Each of us, man, woman, cannot understand ourselves as persons except in a sexual context. I'm not a person with sex. I am a sexual person. My whole being. I mean, the doctors will tell you every single cell in your body, even the tiniest one, just from the end of the pinky, is stamped male, stamped female. It's not just our genitals that are sexual. It's us. Each one of us has been given the gift of sexuality as a special means to grow closer to God. See, I think that we think we have sex and we have to control it for God's sake. But that our real relationship with God is asexual. God doesn't want a bunch of wimps going to him. He wants real men, real women going to him. And actually, the way to get closer to God is through our relationships. Remember that the command that Jesus gave us was not to do good things. The command Jesus gave us was love one another as I have loved you. He commanded us to love the non-baptized as we love ourselves. He commanded us to love those in the church as he has loved us, which is a much more demanding commandment. And there should be a special love toward those we receive the Eucharist with. And we come closest to the kind of love that Jesus is asking of us in, with, and through our sexuality. Supposing you were walking down the street and there was a television camera and a guy came up with a notepad and he said, would you tell me what you think the greatest gift that you got from God is? How would you answer? I really would be very surprised if anybody said their sexuality. And yet, I can't imagine a greater gift. And we separate sexuality from God. We tend to be embarrassed about it. By our baptism, all of us are called to share in the mission of Jesus Christ in the church. And that is through our sexuality. The first question when you were born, anybody who heard about your birth said, is it a boy or is it a girl? It's the first question everybody wants to know. And that's the first question that's asked all the way along the line. They identify you by your first name as male or female, and then there are some switch hitter names, that we don't know quite what, and so you say, is an animal, vegetable, or mineral. Women have a unique ability to bring out the best in men. They also have a unique ability to bring out the worst in men. But really, a real woman makes a man more a man. And as a matter of fact, you can't define man except in terms of women. If there were no women, there would be no men, right? They could be physically built the same way, but they wouldn't be men because you have to have women to be a man. Right? But when good women are around, a guy can be at his best. A guy with other guys is never at his best. A man can make a woman more than she would ever be by herself. Women with one another tend to be at their worst. Also, when we're with a good woman or a good man, we're most responsive. We'll do, because of sexuality, what we'd never do for any other reason. And we do it to please. because we want to please the man in our life or the woman in our life. Sexuality is our humanness. It's not our activity. It's the whole person. And human sexuality is an energy waiting to be released. Now, I can release it in self-centered activity, or as bargaining, take me to the dance and I'll reward you, or manipulative, or to respond to peer pressure. So I have a dragon skin to take back to the boys, or a story to take back to the girls. Or I can use my sexuality trusting and responsive. I know, for example, that whenever I'm receiving a lot of affection, from the women in my life, I can be vulnerable, and I can be open, and I can talk about myself. But I mean, if I'm in an environment or a climate where I'm not receiving sexual affirmation and affection, then I tend to be in the head. And not harshly, but I tend to stay in my head and to be objective. Whenever you're most sexual, you're most your true self. Now remember, we're talking about being sexual, not being genitally active. But also the other person that you're with is allowed to be most themselves. You and I could lack a lot of qualities, brains or physique or manners. But when sexually exciting, we're never boring to those around us. One of the questions that I'm sure is on the minds of most people here is, why not premarital sex? And that's the question that always gets hit anytime a priest is around. And you know, the tragedy is not you're putting us on the spot, but each other. Because that's the question that's asked on an awful lot of dates, at least implicitly. Why not? And it's such a burden. And we're not saying no to premarital sex because it's so bad, but because it's so good. Not because it's forbidden, but because it's so important. See, it's not like a hug or a kiss. Intercourse says, forever, completely, I'm yours, I belong to you. It's a sign. See, and the tragedy is sometimes we misuse the sign. I mean, for example, supposing I went up and I'm all smiles and I have my hands out and I got my hand like this, and the poor guy reaches out to take my hand and I wham him. I said, well, I didn't mean anything by smiling. I just put that meaning on it. And that's what we tend to do with sex. We tend to say, well, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean completely forever. I just meant for tonight. And besides, I didn't say I love you. It's a matter of pride to me. I get the girl without saying those words. But the action says it. Say, I didn't mean to say totally. That's kind of like the guy saying, fire! And everybody dashes out of the room. So, well, I didn't mean that. I just meant there was a match lit. But signs have very real significance. Or sometimes a couple will say, well, look, we both agree that it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean totally and completely. But that's like two people signing a contract in which they agree to do certain things, and then they wink at it as they sign the document. They say, well, we don't really mean that. If not married, it's a goddamn lie. It's a betrayal. The problem of premarital sex is not the sex, but the betrayal. It makes us feel used and taken advantage of. Sad truth. Somebody always gets hurt because they really, really believe they are loved totally and completely. It may be the man, it may be the woman, it may be both, but at least one gets suckered in. And it hurts like hell. I don't know how many young people I've held in my arms that were broken as persons. The suffering. One of the problems we have is this damn social pressure of the custom that you can't go out with different people. That if you're going out with somebody, then you don't go out with anybody else. We've got to break this through Antioch. It's terrible that if I'm going out with one girl, that I can't go out with another girl without being considered to be promiscuous. Or that the girl who goes out with me is betraying her friend. Another thing that we have to recognize is wherever you leave off sexually on the last date, that's where you start on the next date. And it's the point of no premarital sex is not to avoid pregnancy. Pregnancy is not a sin. But avoiding disillusionment and avoiding haunting hurts that sometimes are lifelong. And as far as contraception is concerned, I'm not going to just speak to the young people, I'm going to speak to everybody in this room. Because the same thing is true for the mother as it is for the daughter. And a basic reason for contraception is both mother and daughter don't want to change their lifestyle. And if we allow it for the mother, it's very hard for her to say to the daughter, no. Another thing, oh, but we love each other. Okay, what love? You know, is it just the obscene love of Love Story that says love is never having to say I'm sorry? That's adolescent pipe dreams. Love is constantly having to say I'm sorry and to reconcile. But love is total belonging. And either you do or you don't. And if you love that way, then you're married. And therefore sex is okay, but all I'll say to you is this. If you say to me that you love that way, you just haven't gone through a ceremony, then supposing you break up, would you feel that you're not free to marry again? If you tell me no to that, then I say you're not total. And you're not complete. Sometimes people ask, well, how come it's wrong on Friday night? Then we go through a wedding ceremony on Saturday, and all of a sudden it's Katie bar the door, away we go. Why is it okay on Saturday night and it's wrong on Friday night? And my answer, I think that's a very good question, and my answer to it is, sometimes on Saturday night it's no better than it was on Friday night. Because if it's just as manipulative or just as self-centered, I don't care, you could have had 16 pirouetting bishops at your wedding and it still doesn't make it all right. Someday, practically every one of you will be married. And that's where this whole issue comes up. What do you bring to your marriage? You basically bring yourself. And a big part of yourself is your memories. And unless you're promiscuous and just the local mattress in town and sleeping with everybody, you're going to remember who you made love to. You know, there are books out about the stories of my first love, you know, and it's always, you know, airheads like Joan Collins and people like that. Their pilot lights are out, so they have nothing better to do. Barbara Mandrell, the country singer, had a great song, Sleeping Single in a Double Bed. Well, if you bring memories of premarital sex, you'll be sleeping triple in a double bed. And that's even worse than sleeping single. It gets awfully crowded. One thing that marital sex should be is incomparable. I shouldn't be able to compare my husband or my wife to anybody. He may be the lousiest lover in the world, but I think he's great because he's the only one I've had. She may be Miss Stick, but I still think that she's the most wonderful lover I've ever had because she's the only one. As long as there are no comparisons, you never put each other down sexually. And sex is too intimate to be compared. You know, virginity is not a piece of skin. It's integrity of person. It's coming to the marriage, coming to my beloved with the whole of me. And it's just as important, mates, for us as it is for the women in this room. Guys have just as strong memories as gals, and guys are just as likely to compare. And you have no right to say anything about a woman and her sexual activity unless you're playing it straight. You know, in marriage, I'm never a failure or less if there are no comparisons. And it stops expectations that I live up to somebody else. It's the one thing that a man and woman can absolutely learn together. Everything else about us, we've been influenced by others, by our teachers, by our parents, by our education, so on. But this is the one thing, and isn't this a desire in the hearts of all of us, you know, where we really like to be our full selves? That's why it's so important to be straight and to play it the church way and the gospel way. No one knows me as you do, that's what we say in a good marriage. The biblical word to know means making love. It says, I have given you a total me, the me no one else has a share in. Now, I think it's awfully important that we affirm the sexuality of the people in our lives, like those who are dating in Antioch. Our own parents' sexuality, the parent couple in Antioch. Nothing is more important to a married couple than their sexuality. Oh, we praise them for their spirituality. We praise them for their hard work in Antioch. Do we ever praise them for their sexual love for one another? And do we call them to more? I'll tell you, if your parent couple is irritating you in any way whatsoever, or if you think that you could have a better parent couple, then you work on their sexuality, and you'll have a great parent couple. The same thing is true in your own home. Affirm your friend's sexuality, not in a rough teasing way, but in a delighted way. And for God's sake, be careful of put-downs sexually. Somebody who has acne knows it better than anybody who's looking at him. It's a terrible thing for the sexual self-image of a woman or a man. Some people are fat. Some people are shy. There's a word that I just despise, and it's dag. You know, in the gospel it says, anybody who calls his brother Raka is worthy of hellfire. I wish we could eliminate in Antioch that word dag. Maybe because I was a dag when I was growing up. But that's rotten to do to anybody. And an awful lot of times it's done behind his back, and it's done with all the girls in the group, and none of the girls will look seriously at the guy because the other girls call him a dag. And a lot of times the girls that are using it are no great prizes themselves. Lack of dating in our communities. You know, we worry about Ethiopia. We responded very well to that great celebration of rock music to collect money for Ethiopia. And we close our eyes to classmates starved for companionship. I'm sorry, I just don't believe anybody who goes to the Eucharist, you know, who can leave a brother or a sister hanging on the line out to dry, who doesn't have anywhere to go on Saturday night. There's a song that goes back to my time before the flood called Saturday Night is the Loneliest Night in the Week. I don't mind Sunday at all. I don't care if Monday you don't call. But Saturday night is the loneliest night in the week. And how many of our brothers and sisters are home and feel so unwomanly, so little like a man? And then on Sunday they come to Antioch and we hug them and we say, hello mate, glad to see you. I don't think we have a right to hug on Sunday unless we bring them with us on Saturday. You can't be a real man alone. You can't be a real woman alone. The no sexual person, and all of us are, can be fully happy with a one-sex setup. See, not only are women different from me, but they make me different. See, like I have a very real feminine side of me that doesn't come out when I'm just with men. I'm a very intuitive person, I'm a very sensitive person, and I'm a very caring person. And I really want to be good to people and to help them to feel good about themselves. But when I'm in an all-male crowd, I want to drive, I want to go, I want to move. When women are around, I'm allowed to be more my full self. Sex is not something. It's someone. Us. We want to learn and talk about sex rather than the sexuality of the people in our life. We focus on sex as an it. It becomes something that we do rather than who we are. There's no such thing as sex, really. There are only sexual persons. When I was dating, after I dropped the girl off, I'd be walking home, and the guys on the street corner would say, hey, buddy, did you get it? It was it. And when you got it, you got her. We make sex fun. That's like using a beautiful violin as a cricket bat. Sex is much more than fun. So often sex is self-centered. When I came home from a date, my mother and father used to ask me, did you have a nice time? So what they were really teaching me was that the way I judged the date was by whether I liked it. They never asked me, did she have a nice time? That was her problem, or her parents' problem. Or my presumption was, well, if I had a nice time, then of course she had to enjoy herself because she was out with me. Do you ever really ask yourself how your date did? Other than, I think sometimes we ask ourselves, well, do you think she'll go out with me again? But that's really self-centered. Sometimes you hear people say, well, I did it for him. Horse fertilizer. Our girls live in this damn self-delusion that they're the generous Earth Mother, distributing their spiritual goodies to save poor benighted men. Any time that a girl engages in sex, she does it for the girl, not the boy. Or I was carried away. I mean, you get a picture of Peter Pan, you know. I remember a guy, and it's one of the few evil people I've met in my life. He used to be in boys' retreats. And this guy told me that whenever he ran a party, he used to invite 5 guys and himself and 6 gals, and he'd have punch, and he'd tell everybody that the punch was heavily spiked with liquor. And actually, it was just fruit juice and fizz. And every party he ran, within a half hour, 5 of the 6 girls would pretend to be drunk. And he knew he could score. And that's why he did it. So he never had to work at it. Everybody does it. That's another line, isn't it? All I can think of is everybody's doing it, picking their nose and chewing it. The next good argument is, well, I'm young. You know, when I get a job and when I get married, I'll settle down. Yeah, we kind of think that there's 2 lives. There's the life of a young person, and then there's a life of somebody who is overaged, you know, like over 21. There's only one me. And I'm the same me. And I take those attitudes and activities with me into my future life. I'm an individual person. I can't split my life like that. Boys think girls expect sex. And girls think boys expect them to expect sex. And so the 2 of them are going at this with these expectations. And they're not responding to persons. Say, she won't see me as a man unless I come on strong. You know? And then the girl is afraid her girlfriends will say that she's not much of a date if he doesn't come on strong. Of course, she's going to say no. But he's got to come on. How far can I go? That's the classic question, isn't it? Know what the answer to that is? About 2 blocks. Because really, it's an exploitative question. The question really is, how can I use this other human being enough so that I don't, you know, commit a really big sin, but I can get my jollies? And it's not focusing on the other person. It's not saying how much can I give, it's saying how much can I get. And we look on bra size instead of values. And you know, I got to be honest, I've heard more physical demands from women now than from men. They're always talking about hunks and pecs and all this sort of stuff. And if some guy came out with bra size, we'd say, hey, you're a chauvinist. So, okay, there is the MCP, male chauvinist pig, but there's also FCS, female chauvinist sow. Let me ask you this. On a date, who should control the sex? I really think that most people expect the woman to do it. And you know what happens is after she gets married, she continues to. And the man becomes a beggar in his own bed. Because she's been trained all along. She doles out the goodies from the cookie jar. And when he's nice, he gets it. And when he isn't so nice, he doesn't. And mommy takes care of him. Listen, guys, we have to be just as responsible on a date as the woman is. And it's in an enlightened self-interest for your own happiness in marriage. Because if the woman is doing this for 7 or 8 years, she's not going to stop because she walks down the aisle. Why do I have to wait? I mean, really, that's just an exploitative question, isn't it? I mean, that's using the other to take care of my urges. But the answer to that is you don't have to wait. Get married. If you're not ready to marry, you're not ready for sex. So, well, I'm really ready to get married, but I have to finish uni. Well, who says you have to finish uni? If you're ready to get married, get married. It's just like if a guy's not ready to jump with a parachute, he's not ready to skydive. If you're not ready for marriage, you're not ready for sex. Happiness in life is more determined by self-appreciation, which is sexual. I can't appreciate myself in any other way except as a man. Talk to your mom and dad about what happened when they were dating. So, oh, well, I mean, they were out of it. You know, one of the things that I hear most from young people is, I want people to trust me. If you want to be trusted, you got to give trust. Don't tell me your parents don't trust you, because I'm going to ask you, do you trust your parents? Are you willing to trust them and to let them share with you? Will you treat your parents as adults and talk about their dating and talk about your own? See, you know, the problem is often is not so much that they don't understand you. The problem is they understand you too well. And we don't always like that. Who are your friends? Your friends determine more who you date than almost any other factor in your life. So I'd ask you this question. Would you like your sister to marry one of your mates? Well, no. Well, then you shouldn't be going with those guys. Would you want your brother to marry one of your girlfriends? Well, yeah, I hate him. Say, well, one or two, but the rest. Well, then what in the name of heaven are you hanging around with a bunch like that for? Well, they're fun. And what they're doing is they're making you the kind of a person that somebody wouldn't want their sister to marry. Because if you hang around with that type, you become that type. So, well, I mean, you know, they're that way now, but they'll straighten out. Not necessarily. How am I using my sexuality now? Am I using it for other people, or am I just using it for myself? Who I date is most important. Do I just date on a basis of that they're in the wild crowd? Or do I date on a basis of, you know, that they're hunks or dolls? Or do I really try to find somebody who will make me more than I could be on my own, as a man or as a woman? First rule of thumb, my brothers and sisters, is you date Catholic. Because if you don't date Catholic, there's no guarantee that you'll marry Catholic, because you'll marry somebody you date, and you won't control who you fall in love with. One of the things I'm proudest of in my life was my niece Megan was 5 years old. I told her, Megan, in this family we do two things. We go to university and we marry Catholic. Now she's 15. And anytime the dating thing comes up, she, I know, Uncle Charles, I date Catholic because I want to marry Catholic. You know, but if I started telling her at 15 that, I would have had World War III on my hands. Just before I left for here, I was teasing her a little bit because she's rather an expensive young woman, to say the least. And I told her, you're going to have to marry a Texas oil man, Megan. And she says, they're all Baptists, Uncle Charles. we've got to see that marrying in the faith family is of tremendous significance. Now, of course, the thing is this: if being Catholic is not important to you, there's no reason for you to date Catholic. I would concede that. But if you tell me being Catholic is important to you, then you darn well better date Catholic. There was a census taken up in the United States a couple years back. See, everybody knows that divorce is a very real problem, and I think anybody who has two brains to rub together doesn't want to get into a marriage that's going to end up in divorce. There's too much pain. The United States Census found this, that 1/3 of all American marriages end in divorce. But if the couple marry in church and go to church regularly, the divorce rate is cut to 1 in 50. And if they marry in church, go to church regularly, and pray together as a family, the divorce rate becomes 1 in 1,105. So what I would say to you, if you're really serious about saying, I never want to get divorced, then you better date a sincerely religious person. And you better start praying when you go out with that person. And not just say, well, after we get married, we'll pray. Now, I'm not saying spend the whole date praying. Well, you know, everybody laughs at that, but 90% of what goes on in a date is really laughable. Because it's not real. Everybody's putting on an act. And a lot of times you go to a place where you can't talk. It's just like, you know, if you mention that somebody has 14 children, everybody kind of titters nervously. What's laughable is when you have 2. Well, it's not laughable, that's tragic. I'm talking about when it's deliberate. See, we have our values screwed up. But one of the beautiful things about Antioch is you should be matchmaking for one another. If somebody doesn't have somebody, find them one. That's the beautiful thing. And if there's nobody in this Antioch, then go out and run another Antioch so you find somebody for them. The more sexual you become, the more you will fulfill God's plan. There's another way of saying the more you're a woman, the more you're a man, the more pleasing you are to God. Now, that's not how many times you score, but how much of a man you are for the women in your life now. Like, how are you with your mother? I mean, do you treat your mother like a space cadet? And she's Miss Picker-Upper? Well, that's the way you're going to treat your wife. How do you treat your sister? I mean, she's there to take all my abuse. How do you treat your grandmother? How do you treat your girlfriend? How do you treat a woman teacher in the school? If you're a woman, how do you treat your father? I mean, is it always arguments? Or you just think, well, he's out of it? How do you treat your brother? Are you sexual with the men in your life? See, the problem is after marriage, you'll be as sexual as you are now with your father. So if you can't hug and kiss your father, then you better tell your husband that he's going to have a cold marriage. God's normal way to bring people to him is through sexuality. The normal way people are brought to God in the sacrament of baptism is by parenting, which is a sexual experience. Converts are usually brought in by a spouse, which is sexual. Sexual activity does not develop your sexuality, but being a full person does. It's just as important to be highly sexual as it is to be highly educated. So the church says to you, go for it. Be as much of a woman, be as much of a man as you can be, because we need you that way. Thanks, brothers and sisters.
Fantastic, really excellent talk.
I agree. Ditto. Terrific. Really excellent.
Has your view of your own sexuality changed upon listening to Father Chuck?
I think the main thing that it's done for me is it has given me a concrete reason that I can give to people for not having sex before marriage. Before I might have said that, well, it's against the Ten Commandments, or you might get the girl pregnant. But now I realise how much damage it can do, how much damage it'll do to the individual, how much it can hurt people, and how much damage it does to the actual marriage.
That's really beautiful. Would you comment?
I think probably the thing it's done for me is I've realised what a sacrament marriage and sexuality really is. And before, I guess, like Bernard, I probably thought, well, if you love someone, why not? And if you're going to get married, then why wait? But now I've realised how important it is to wait, and how much more beautiful and what a greater sacrament will be if you do wait.
What do you think your greatest gift is?
Sexuality.
Yeah, sexuality.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us.